We have a new question in this poll, at least I think it's new, and this is about the quality of our schools. We asked a question, are our schools in the same or better or worse shape than they were a few years ago?
With this campaign shaping up as who is the education governor and what do we think about schools, and some evidence I'll show you in a second about people's priorities, and you already saw it with the most important problem. This question of, well, do you think the public schools are getting better, the same, or worse? And the answer is pretty heavily on thinking it's in worse shape now than a few years ago. Only 15% think the public schools are clearly better now than they were. A lot of people think they're about the same, but 44%, a pretty striking plurality, think they're in worse shape now than they were. Now, I'm not going to show you the data on this, but it turns out that whether you have kids in school or not doesn't affect this much. Where you live regionally doesn't affect it much. Urban, suburban, rural doesn't affect it very much. So this is a pretty widespread perception. When I say doesn't affect it much, maybe there's 4 or 5 points difference, but it's modest and the basic pattern is pretty much the same across these places. So this raises some interesting questions about how do we think about the shape of the schools and how does that emerge as part of both parties' campaigns with two folks who are closely associated with education.
And this next question points to something we've been seeing in more recent polling, Charles.
This is the change I hinted at a minute ago. Would you think it's more important to cut property taxes or to increase spending on public schools? By essentially a 2-to-1 majority, people think more spending on public schools is called for. But that's quite different from where it had been. If we jump back to 2013, when we first asked about it, 49% wanted to cut property taxes, 46% wanted to increase spending on schools. So from there to 32 to 61, and roughly this ratio is what we've seen for the last year or so, more than the last year. We really have seen a shift in the public's expression of its priorities between taxes and schools.